Okay, hope everyone is well. Thought I'd do a bit of a shout out today. This is a book by Evgeny Morozov called The Net Delusion. The Net Delusion is also subtitled The Dark Side of Internet Freedom. Really quite an amazing book. You know, he's a journalist and he's trying to explore, I guess, and critique the promise that the internet had early on for like bringing naturally freedom and democracy that many people, as he would say, were sort of like technological determinists, and they believed that the internet, just in its very structure, the way that it was just the way this is organized, was going to bring in something like unrivaled forms of democracy, and that was really the promise of the internet. Now, he says, you know, by the net delusion, he kind of brings together two different concepts. One's what he calls cyber utopianism, and the other is internet centrism. And he follows this up with a book later called Save Everything, Click Here, on the folly of technological solutionism. Again, this notion that all problems need some sort of technological solution, and that if we bring this extreme technological solutionism orientation toward life, and we make the internet the center piece of that, we're going to achieve some sort of cyber utopia. And I think he's saying, there's a lot of reason to be skeptical of these claims. Now, part of the reason that those claims got off the ground, I mean, there were certain thinkers, depending upon how you read him. Marshall McLuhan leads some people into something like that there's a naturally decentralizing or inherently decentralizing function to electric technologies, and that is going to destabilize centralized authorities. I mean, that was part of the claim. Again, it depends on how well and how thoroughly you read McLuhan, but I think a simple take into McLuhan does lead people into something like that. But it wasn't just scholarly things. It was obviously massive social changes that were happening in the 80s, 90s, and in the 2000s. Things like the fall of the Berlin Wall that had a huge impact on the promise of the internet to spread more and more democratic ideas and to infiltrate more authoritarian governments with people who they weren't going to be able to silence, or they weren't going to be able to keep them from expressing their views and getting their views shared with larger populations. Arab Spring was another, act that I think really burned in a lot of people the capacity of the internet, cell phones, orchestrated social technology for revolt purposes, and again to overthrow some of the more authoritarian regimes on the country, around the country. Now, I guess around the world, right? Really. So I think the way to come at the book is, and this kind of makes riffs into other comparisons that get made in media ecology between the kind of techno-dystopianism of like Huxley's Brave New World versus Orwell's 1984. And this appears in Neil Postman's work a couple places, but I think what he does here is, again, a really good job of laying out what he calls the three pillars of authoritarianism. Now, the three pillars of authoritarianism, he's kind of pulling this from George Orwell, and he says, basically what you want to understand under authoritarian regimes are what they need to get a hold of and what they take control over, and this is how a lot of the manipulations go on, is they have to have rigorous forms of censorship, rigorous forms of surveillance, and then, again, extensive modes of propaganda. And I think the more that you think about it, at first pass, you might say, aha, this is where the internet really is able to usurp and thwart those who would try to censor them, because it does seem as if, the internet has just great potential for avoiding surveillance. I mean, not only do people have anonymous identities online, let's start with, instead of starting with surveillance, let me start with censorship. I think censorship seemed the most robustly, in terms of it seemed to be the most robust in affording resources for those who would want to escape more authoritarian forms of information access and of governmental control. That is, the internet, with its promise of, anyone can upload anything. Maybe you can have a video unlisted, and if it gets silenced, if it gets deleted, if it gets censored and put out, somebody else can just pop it up again and have it show up somewhere else. And there is something to be said there, that if there was one leg, anyway, that Orwell's his authoritarianism could have been undercut, it would seem that censorship would be probably the most promising. And yet, when you start to look at it, when you look at the real details of how these systems have been implemented around the world, that's really not the case. So not only do you have things like Green Dam, which, Green Dam is an algorithmic software that's built into the internet in China, that it allows people to, integrate the functions of both surveillance and censorship. So they can see, they can do like keystroking algorithms where you're watching what you're typing, and if they see you consistently typing into things that they find uncomfortable or against government interests, maybe just as an example, you're typing in the word democracy. As you type in the word democracy, and you may not even know that there is such a thing as Green Dam, and that your internet is being algorithmically opened or closed according to your browsing practices or habits. But if you start to type in the word democracy, suddenly parts of the internet, they disappear for you. And then if you start to get creative and you're going to use alternative spellings for the word democracy to see if you can get around it, well, then you're going to get more shut down in your internet. And if you persist, you're probably going to be tagged as a dissident, and you may have people visit your door and ask, what you're up to, and, who knows what happens to some people who persist in those things. I think that's the fear about authoritarian regimes, and how, as Morozov's saying, the delusion is that it's bringing freedom and this techno-utopianism, cyber-utopianism. Instead, what we're finding is that unfortunately, it's creating the infrastructure for the greater ease and more potent forms of authoritarianism. And across the world, we can see this happening. So let's go to these other two, which I think are, again, a little bit more interesting. And the more that we think about it, it's like, wow, yeah. So the internet has become not only a place where censorship does occur and is able to be algorithmically organized and kiboshed, silenced, right? Forms of voice get shut down. But the capacity of the internet for surveillance and for distributing propaganda is absolutely astronomical. And he documents it so beautifully, right? I mean, he just gives all these different examples. And see, I think part of the difficulty is that once you have kind of social network interlocking modes, these sort of, different modes and forms of social networks, well, then you can kind of crowdsource your censorship, your surveillance, and your propaganda campaigns. So take, examples of like surveillance. I think we're all so aware that Facebook, Google, I guess almost any browser, any kind of internet interface technology, it has all kinds of information. The big data is being gathered on you. And I think, in some way, people tolerated that with 9/11. When 9/11 happened, everyone got cell phones. And when they all acquired a cell phone, many people felt as if they were losing a great amount of individual liberties. And they did, right? I mean, the NSA happened, and a rise of surveillance started to occur. And you could see more and more of the ways that the internet could be used for pretty significant surveillance. Now, people said, well, it's for safety's sake. And they don't mind losing some of their privacy. They don't mind losing some of their ability to travel anonymously in public because they felt safer. But what they didn't notice is that safety is also a different way of saying that the country has become more and more authoritarian. that authoritarianism is definitely on the rise. You can see it on a lot of fronts and political fronts, and it's technologically being supported by the infrastructure that the internet provides. Now, propaganda is just wild when you think about it. That, you know, one of the ways that the internet has been worked by those people who are interested in totalitarian command and rule is they just fill the internet with endless distraction. So it's in one sense a propaganda campaign, and it's an amplified voice for political interests and for certain ideologies to be espoused. But it's just as much, it's an endless stream of cat videos of foreign bots and dissidents going amidst genuine political unrest and points of discord and throwing in just antagonistic message threads. You know, I think sometimes people don't realize how much propaganda is being sent into their Facebook feed, their Twitter feed, into their various information pockets that they're looking into, and much of it is just literally propaganda. It's being distributed not simply to advance a particular ideology, but to confuse, to otherwise preoccupy, and some of it's just point blank distraction. Yeah, it could be infiltrating the internet with porn and cat videos and just other kind of stuff that people, you know, vegetables and other kinds of things that people are cooking. And that's interesting, but it keeps people away from politically acting and organizing in their action. You know, when you think about how all these are being used together, again, Green Dam, you have distributed disruption of service, like DDoS attacks, where people can take advantage of the limited resources on a particular network and then just have, you know, things be flooded to the point of collapse. But there also, you know, I think many people are realizing that there are, you know, face recognition softwares that are increasingly used in public places, and then those public places they're monitoring everywhere, and people are being tracked, and there is quite a significant loss of freedom and loss of civil liberties in some way that has come with the net. And I think that, you know, Morozov's book is just such an excellent resource for someone who wants to think about how this promise of democracy and the promise of freeing up subjugated voices and letting everyone have their say within, you know, again, a greater ease of open marketplace for anyone's voice to be amplified, that in some sense is partly true. We don't deny all those things, but to look at it by stepping back and looking at authoritarian regimes around the world and how particular authoritarian regimes have used these technologies to greatly extend their power and to amplify it. And I thought what I would do is try to end this with, you know, I hear all this coronavirus stuff that's going on. It's endless conspiracy theory. You know, people are accusing 5G networks of causing coronavirus, or that Bill Gates is some kind of evil plan and all this kind of stuff. Okay, first, I don't think that 5G gives coronavirus. I don't. And I don't think Bill Gates has an evil plan. No, I think he actually is pretty interested in some of these technologies that will help in a pandemic, particularly this issue of contact tracing, and that he's interested in facilitating some of the technologies that could help people more robustly contain and get the coronavirus, I guess, in better shape for everyone. Now, here's where I think some of these crazy conspiracy theories, they get a little bit of traction because there are perhaps some misrecognized concerns that are maybe should be legitimately registered. So, you know, this, you know, the thought of contact tracing it's intense. You know, you're going to have phones that you're going to make people download the government app, and then everyone's going to have to be able to be traced where they were, who they come into contact with, and that it's going to align with everyone else's phone who was in a, whatever, how many mile radius or how many feet radius. There's all kinds of parameters. And in a lot of ways, in order to do this robust kind of contact tracing, this robust form of, analysis of who has been where and who's come into contact at what distance, what's the likelihood, that requires, again, the 5G network, at least to really pull it off in the way that some people have done. I would encourage people, I'll see if I can get the link, of this woman going shopping in Dubai and the rigmarole that you have to go through with, the government app, and you put in your state ID card and announce by what mode of transportation and what time you're going to go, and then they send you a permit. I think a lot of people in the U.S. are really, they're concerned about that level of loss of freedom. And not that Bill Gates is part of the authoritarian regimes, but what could happen is, in the same way that when we had cell phones come in after 9/11, we could have coronavirus give a great push toward 5G networks, have a great push toward contact tracing and increased modes of surveillance, increased modes of governmental imposition over people's free rights. And then, as the coronavirus, maybe it goes away, maybe there's a vaccine, maybe there's some sort of therapeutic, a prophylactic, some way we get the coronavirus handled. But now there's this infrastructure in there, and if there would be a sudden takeover of an authoritarian government, I think there is a legitimate concern. I think some people are saying, yeah, well, who are they going to round up? It's going to be political dissidents. It's going to be people who are maybe political opponents, maybe just undesirables of any flavor that you want to name, whether it's by sexuality, whether it's by race, whether it's by ideology, religion, belief, whatever it is. Suddenly, anyone and everyone could be tracked and maybe silenced, maybe even put away without other people knowing it. See, I think the degree to which the internet, it's not neutral, but that doesn't mean that it's fully deterministic, right? It's not guaranteeing freedom and democracy by its structure. It did have, and it does have, some of those possibilities, but I think people need to be realistic and, check out the Morozov book. Give a good look and see for yourself how much the very technologies that we thought were going to bring something like a cyber utopianism may very likely be setting the groundwork for global forms of authoritarianism. Okay, thank you.